And that is the power I want every person to have. I want you to feel that when you get to a crossroads with a decision ahead of you, that it was chosen for you specifically to tackle because you are capable and you are actually the most equipped person to make that decision. Welcome to the Love Your Brain podcast, the podcast designed for everyday people who are ready to hop off the negative thought hamster wheel and enjoy a less hostile environment in their own brains. Our brains are where we live our entire lives, and I'm on a mission to help people see that they have everything they need to make it a happier place to be. So join us for this episode of the Love Your Brain podcast. Let's get started. All right, well, today we are continuing our series on decision making. And I'm so excited. We have so many new followers to the podcast. I'm just so glad you're here. If you can, take a moment today and leave a review. It will help even more people find this podcast. And basically, just write maybe something that the podcast has helped you with or something that you enjoy about it. It really helps push the podcast out to more people and gives them an idea of what it's all about. So feel free to pause here, go write that review, and circle back with me. I'll be here. If you missed last week's episode, we introduced this series on decision making. We talked about how stressful it can be to be on a hamster wheel of indecision, really trying to make a decision that's the right decision, but not knowing which path is right, and how that can zap us of so much joy in our lives because we're so busy thinking over and ruminating over decisions instead of being able to just enjoy the here and now. And often, what happens when we get into this stuck place with decision making, where we can't figure out what the right path is, we start to try and outsource our decision making. And that's what we're going to discuss today, the outsourcing of decision making. And what I mean by that is we attempt to tap into resources outside of ourselves to help us make the decision. Maybe we're just looking for someone to help us make the decision. Maybe we're actually looking to someone to actually make the decision for us. It makes sense though, right? If we're struggling to figure out the right thing to do, then we look around and try and find a qualified source to try and help us navigate these waters. And it's not always a bad thing. And of course, really considering all the options, getting more information from other people, it can definitely help us to make more informed decisions. Having a support system to help you navigate challenging decisions is a wonderful thing to have in a lot of ways. But I do think there are some downsides to outsourcing our decision making that can be important to consider. But let's start off just by talking about the pros, the positive parts of outsourcing our decisions, because there are plenty. So, one thing it can do is help give us an outside perspective, which can be really helpful, especially if you've been in a situation where you've just been sitting, ruminating on the same choices over and over again. Getting an outside perspective can really help shed some new light on what can feel like almost a stalemate of a decision process. It can pump some new energy into that so you can revisit that decision making process with fresh energy, with fresh ideas, and that can feel really good and can be really helpful in our decision making process. It can also give us a moment of feeling like there is less pressure on us. Because sometimes when we are stuck in that process where we feel like we're having to make this decision all on our own, being able to sit with someone else with those thoughts can really feel good because it takes a little bit of that pressure off because you're sharing that burden of that situation with another person, which is great. And if you're talking to the right person, it can be even more empowering, especially if that person is helping you to remember the things that are important for you in this process. That is an amazing attribute that I look for in a good therapist and good friends. People that are able to point you back to you. Often these are people that know you well and they're able to really get outside of themselves and focus on your values, what's important to you, your own essence. Those people are really good at being objective. They can help you remind you of things that maybe you've forgotten that are important to you, your values, your goals. All those things can really help you process through that decision from your lens a little more clearly. Those are the gems we all need in life. But let's now talk about the cons of outsourcing our decision making, because there are a few. And what can happen if either you reach out too much and lean too heavily on outside sources, or if you lean on the wrong person in your decision making process. And I don't even really want to say that this might be the wrong person, because that makes it sound like they're bad in some way. That's not really how I see it. It's just people being human. These are reactions that all of us have at times, but it can result in some less favorable situations for you. So here is one example. Maybe the person you are talking to could be coming from a biased perspective. And again, I don't mean this in a negative way, it's just a human way. If you're talking to someone who could at all be impacted by what you decide, then they're coming at it from a biased perspective, right? They might be subconsciously or maybe even consciously guiding you down a path that works best for them in the long run instead of what's best for you. And worse yet, in some cases, unfortunately, our people pleasing muscle can kick in by default when we're asking for others' opinions on our decisions. And we can almost get into our like caveman brain tendencies and try to make a decision that makes others happy instead of ourselves, which again is not going to be the most aligned action for us. And what I mean by caveman tendencies is actually that people pleasing really comes out of our early evolution, right? When we were way back in the day, we lived in communities where if we didn't all align and didn't all stay on the same page, we could actually be alienated from the community, which could mean our needs might not be met because we all had a role to play. And if you were alienated, you might actually die. That is, in fact, why when you go against the flow of the people around you, it sometimes feels like you're dying because that caveman brain kicks in and says, wait a tick, try and figure out the risks associated with making a decision that's different than the people around you. But now, thankfully, we can actually get into a different portion of our brain and be like, okay, I know where that thought's coming from, and I don't need to make a decision from that place. And the next issue I often see is when the person you're speaking to begins to project. For example, if you're talking to a friend about something that you're struggling with, and you're really going over this decision with them and asking for their perspective on what decision you should make, if that person has been through a similar struggle and maybe it didn't turn out great for them, they may start projecting that fear onto you and sway you in a certain direction because they don't want that same negative thing to happen in your experience. Now, could it be possible that your situation could turn out the same as theirs? Of course, but it's just as likely to turn out completely different. And fear, honestly, is usually the driving force here, especially when you're talking about someone who cares for you. They aren't doing this to be mean. They're simply allowing fear to drive them, and they're trying to help you avoid the pain that they experienced. And again, these aren't bad people, they're just people being human. And it's easy to fall into the thought process that your experience is going to be the same as someone else's, but that's just not factual. And I can tell you just about every big decision I've made in life was met with someone who cared about me trying to tell me all the bad things that could happen, all from a place of love. And what do these negatives have in common about outsourcing our decision making is that we're relying on someone else to help us make a decision that is not you. That person does not have to live with the consequences of the decision that you make. And they're coming at that decision from their own framework of beliefs that no matter how similar that person is to you, is likely very different from you because we're all just human and vastly different from each other. And the more we outsource our decision making, it's like we're trying to put on parts of a different person onto our body and then move around. It's going to be really wonky. It doesn't work right. The parts don't move together simultaneously because they're not all from the same source. And you want your decisions that you make to happen with ease, to look like that decision came from you, that reflect your true essence. And what we lose sight of sometimes when we're struggling with a decision is often that decision is there for a reason. It is there for us for a reason. It's not just to tick a box that, okay, well, that decision's made. Great, let's move on with life now. Those decisions come into our path for us to grow, for us to evolve into the person we're meant to be. Each decision we are faced with is really giving us the opportunity to step more fully into who we are and to grow into the person we're meant to be. And I think if we can approach difficult decisions with more of that perspective, it can help relieve some of the stress and weightiness of it. It's just our next step on our journey. If you think that that decision is here for me to decide which way to go because I was chosen to make this decision, it's like being on an imaginary quest, or maybe you're in a video game where you've been chosen as the one to determine the path to take. That's kind of cool. That's exciting. It can be a creative process, an inspiring process, where you get to look at what you have in your tool belt, maybe that no one else has, to help you make the decision on the next step. And that is the power I want every person to have. I want you to feel that when you get to a crossroads with a decision ahead of you, that it was chosen for you specifically to tackle because you are capable and you are actually the most equipped person to make that decision. And I think the key here is you are making the best choice that aligns with you because that decision is going to further your own unique path. You're not meant to just pick the decision where you think you've calculated everything enough, that you've got that result completely planned out perfectly to a T, right? That's a huge reason why we outsource our decision making because we think if we gather other people's perspectives and insight, then we'll have more information to better calculate the risks and rewards of each option and better plan for this perfect result. But if you have lived a day on this planet, you know that is not how life works, right? We can plan and we can calculate and we can weigh options and we can think that we know what will give us a perceived best result. But that is just not how it works. That can be also a really heartbreaking place to end up when we're basically thinking that we've calculated the best perfect plan and it doesn't work out that way, right? That's when regret comes into play. And we're going to be talking more about that next week. But if you listen to part one of this decision making series, I shared with you a story to inspire you to start thinking about when you made a decision that didn't always make sense on paper, but you felt like it was the right decision for you. And this week, I'm going to share something similar to really illustrate this idea we've been talking about making the most aligned decisions for you, even if it doesn't make sense to others. So, when I got my social work degree, the typical route for most students in getting their bachelor's in social work is once you have your BSW, you would move on to the master's program shortly after. Because if you complete your master's within a certain period of time, I want to say it was like 5 years after you graduate with your bachelor's, you only have to take 1 year of courses to get your master's in social work instead of the full 2 years, which is what someone just coming into that program with no background in social work would have to do. So if you wait too long and you try to get your master's in social work later, you have to repeat courses and likely then your master's would take about 2 years to complete instead of one. And this will probably be way more information than you ever cared to know about social work, but typically most social work positions do require a master's. And those social workers, especially the ones you see doing counseling, they do have their master's. But I kind of always knew I didn't want to do counseling. And although I was super clear on that, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I just knew what I didn't want to do. And that's what I want you to hear from me. I did not know what I wanted the outcome to be with my education, but I knew when I graduated that getting my master's in social work was not the path for me. I knew it in my gut intuitively. I was just, that's not for me. But everyone, obviously my teachers, the people in my department, but also people on the outside, family members, friends, other social workers, they kept telling me I was crazy. That this was a terrible idea to lose the opportunity to get my master's in a year. They kept urging me to hurry up and get it done. As the years went by, they're like, you're running out of time. They kept projecting fear onto me. And it didn't make any logical sense, really, for anyone to think that my path was the right path, right? Because it just kind of made sense. It would be better, it would be more efficient if I got my master's quickly. But I just had this feeling in my gut that getting my master's was not the path for me, and I had peace about it. And honestly, here I am 20 years into my career. I still have no master's, and I'm still happy with that decision. I ended up getting certified as a life coach, which I loved, and I was able to do the type of work I was really passionate about. And I've also continued to use my social work degree as well in a fairly non-traditional way, but eventually worked up into administrative work. So it all worked out. And I'm so glad I did not let the fear of others redirect me from my path. And looking back, I also recognize how I did not make that decision based on calculated risk. I did not even know what the outcome would be or even what I really wanted it to be. That's the funny thing. I didn't know what I wanted, but I knew for sure the path that wasn't right for me. And I knew if I held out, I would figure it out eventually. And I share this as a reminder that some of the best decisions, the most aligned decisions, won't necessarily be calculated well. The risks might not be well addressed. And you may not even have a good idea of what you want the outcome to look like. And that is okay. And sometimes, honestly, those are the best paths to take. So thanks so much for hanging out with me today and for joining me on this decision making series. Next week, I'll be covering the topic of regret when it comes to decisions. And the following week, the grand finale, we'll be going over my favorite topic, how to follow your gut and leaning in to listen to your own intuition, making decisions that are the most aligned with you. Have a great week, guys. I hope you found something helpful here today on the Love Your Brain podcast. Maybe a laugh or a feeling of validation, or maybe just a few moments to have company while you do your laundry. Whatever you take from it, I hope you enjoyed your time and leave feeling empowered to be more you every day. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on the next episode, and leave a review. I'd love to hear what you think. Have a great one.